Underneath the golden hush of a Santa Barbara morning, I stared at my phone screen as the call ended, my father's voice still echoing in my ears. "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father." That was it. No emotion, no hesitation, just a severed thread, clean and final. It was like someone had punched a hole in my chest and the air just leaked out. People talk about heartbreak as if it's always romantic, but let me tell you, nothing stings more than being told by the man who raised you that your presence is too inconvenient to fit into the family portrait, especially when all you wanted was to help your mom celebrate her 60th birthday. Especially when you just finished a major funding round at your startup and were finally taking a breather to do something meaningful. Show up, be there, make a simple cake, string up lights in the backyard like every other year. But this year, I was told I wasn't needed. No, not just not needed. I was told to stay away. My name is Elena. I'm 33 years old, co-founder of a medtech startup that operates out of Santa Barbara, California. I live in a minimalist apartment 3 blocks from the beach where the coffee's always strong and the mornings are quieter than they should be. People know me as efficient, sharp, maybe even intimidating. But inside, I've been fighting for something much more basic than respect. I've been fighting to be seen, to be included. Since I was a kid, I knew I wasn't the daughter my parents prayed for. I didn't sparkle. I didn't beg for attention or charm dinner guests with stories. That was my older sister, Samantha. Tall, elegant, with a voice like silk and an Instagram-perfect life. Even as children, people noticed her first, remembered her longer, and asked about her more often. I was just there, helpful, invisible, reliable. When Samantha brought boyfriends home, the entire house came alive. The best china, fresh roses, candlelit dinners. When I came home with promotions, long hours, or tales of international conferences, the response was always the same. "That's great, Elena. So how long will you be staying?" I tried not to take it personally. Maybe they just didn't understand what I did. Explaining startup culture and medtech innovation to people who think remote diagnostics means you fix remote controls wasn't easy. Still, I stayed patient. I sent monthly transfers to cover their bills, electricity, water, internet, even satellite TV. I never missed a payment, never complained. I just thought, if I keep being useful, maybe one day they'll see me as more than a background character in Samantha's spotlight. But all it took was one phone call to burn the illusion to the ground. That week, I had just secured a major investment deal from a firm in San Francisco, $5 million to scale our diagnostic platform nationwide. It was our company's biggest milestone yet. I was proud. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time my family would be too. I booked a flight to surprise Mom, help decorate, bake that strawberry cake she always liked, maybe even sit down and tell them what I really did. Let them see me. When I called to let them know I'd be coming early, it was my dad who answered. I could tell something was off the moment he said hello. He didn't sound busy or angry, just unfamiliar. "Hey, Dad," I said, smiling. "I was thinking of flying in a couple days early to help with Mom's birthday. I've cleared my schedule." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Elena, maybe it's best if you don't come home this year." The words didn't compute. I actually smiled, assuming it was some weird joke. "No, it's okay. I want to be there." That's when he dropped it. The real reason. Samantha's bringing her new boyfriend. He's a CFO, very well-spoken, very polished. Your work, it's just a bit hard to explain. You showing up might invite comparisons, and we just want this to be a smooth introduction. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt cold. Like someone had opened a door inside me and let the warmth slip out. "Are you saying I'll ruin her party?" I asked. He didn't walk it back. He doubled down. "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father." He hung up just like that. I stared at the espresso I'd made minutes earlier. The steam had already disappeared. My hand trembled slightly as I put the cup down. I sat in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I couldn't believe that everything I had done, all the sacrifices, the support, the silence, meant absolutely nothing in the face of someone else's guest list. But this isn't a story about victimhood. It's a story about clarity. That afternoon, I logged into my banking app and scrolled through 2 years of payment history, nearly $16,000 paid toward my parents' living expenses. I hovered over the autopay buttons, electricity, water, internet, cable, and clicked cancel. One by one, no alarms, no warnings, just silence. The same silence I'd lived with every time my name wasn't mentioned during family dinners. Every time Samantha's accomplishments were paraded like medals, and mine were treated like puzzle pieces no one could fit. That night, I sat on my balcony with a mug of peppermint tea, watching the sun dip behind the Santa Ynez Mountains. I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean, like someone had finally drawn a boundary I'd been too afraid to mark myself. And the irony? It hadn't even reached its peak yet, because just a few days later, Samantha's boyfriend, this polished, impressive CFO, would walk into my office and call me boss. And suddenly the story my family had carefully scripted for years would start to crack. One truth at a time. Before we dive deeper into how everything unraveled, if this story has already struck a chord with you, even just a little, I invite you to support the channel by subscribing. Your support helps us bring more honest, emotional, and powerful stories like this to life. It only takes a second, but it means the world to us. Now, before we continue, I have a small question for you. Imagine you're in Elena's position. You've been the quiet backbone of your family, sacrificing, supporting, always staying in the shadows. Then one day, you're told your presence makes things awkward. What would you do? Would you A, show up anyway and confront them face to face, or B, step back and let your silence speak volumes? Drop your answer, A or B, in the comments. I'd love to hear what you would do, and remember, there's no right or wrong, just your truth. Now, let's continue, because what happens next isn't just surprising, it's poetic, and it's only just beginning. The morning after the call with my father, I woke up feeling like I had crossed some invisible threshold, one I didn't remember agreeing to, but knew I could never walk back from. The silence from my family was complete. No calls, no texts, not even a vague message from my mother, who, even at her coldest, never let more than a day pass without sending a heart emoji or a gentle, "Hope work isn't too stressful, sweetie." But now, nothing. Just the stillness of disconnection and a dawning realization that this time, the gap might be permanent. I spent the following days buried in work. Distraction came easy when your inbox was overflowing and your startup had just landed its biggest investment. My team was buzzing with ideas, new prototypes, regional expansions, partnerships to formalize. They called me focused, efficient, composed. No one knew I hadn't slept properly since the call, or that I'd stopped replying to any message that came from a family group chat. By the time Friday rolled around, my calendar was blessedly light. I didn't have the heart to make weekend plans, so I walked down to the marina, grabbed a lavender latte from my favorite cafe, and sat at the farthest bench where the ocean breeze could dull the noise in my head. That's when Samantha called. I stared at the screen for a good 30 seconds before I answered. I wasn't angry. I was curious. "Elena," she chirped, like she hadn't heard the tremor in my voice that last time we spoke. "Okay, so Mom's birthday was a bit intense." I didn't respond. Letting silence speak had become my newest form of self-care. She filled it anyway. "I know you're probably swamped, but I was wondering, would you want to grab dinner tomorrow night? Just you and me. Nothing fancy." Again, no acknowledgement of the call. No apology. Just this offer tossed like a Band-Aid over a bleeding wound. Still, something in me leaned toward yes. Not for reconciliation, but for clarity. I'd been silent. I'd drawn a line. But maybe now I needed to face it all, if only to confirm what I already knew deep down. "Sure," I said. "Just us." The next night we met at a restaurant in downtown Santa Barbara, neutral territory. The lighting was soft, the space quiet. Samantha was already there, dressed in muted tones, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. For once, she looked a little tired. Or maybe just real. We hugged awkwardly. Saturday. Ordered wine. The first 10 minutes were shallow. How's work? Are you sleeping? Did you finally try that yoga class I mentioned? I gave clipped answers, sipped my Merlot, and waited. Then she smiled brightly, that practiced ease that always made her the favorite at family reunions. So, she said, voice light, there's someone I'd love for you to meet. I froze just for a second. She wasn't doing this, was she? My boyfriend, Ryan. We've been seeing each other for about 5 months now, and he's honestly amazing. Super smart. He just got transferred to the Santa Barbara office, actually. Funny coincidence. He said he just started at a med tech company downtown. Pacific Genomics? She paused, searching my face. I gave her nothing. He mentioned the name of his direct supervisor, and I was like, wait, is that... Her voice trailed off. The realization was beginning to settle in her face. Elena? She whispered, blinking. Ryan's working under you? I nodded slowly, setting down my glass. Yes, I'm his supervisor and co-founder of Pacific Genomics. For the first time that evening, the conversation went still. Her smile disappeared. I watched her face shift. Confusion, disbelief, something that might have been embarrassment, but quickly rearranged into controlled surprise. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Why would I? I replied, voice level. No one ever asked what I did? She blinked, then looked down at her hands. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was just heavy. You really built that company? She asked after a moment. With 2 partners from grad school, I said. We started in a garage with 1 used laptop and a bunch of ramen noodles. Now we employ over 60 people. Ryan's one of our newer hires, transferred from New Jersey. Samantha picked up her wine and held it but didn't drink. I had no idea, she said softly. I know, I replied. No one ever asked. There was no need to go into the details. The missed birthdays, the ignored promotions, the endless comparisons. It all hung there between us anyway, invisible but undeniable. I didn't mean for the birthday to go that way, she said finally. I really didn't know Dad said that to you. I believe you, I said, but it doesn't change what he said. She nodded slowly. Mom was devastated, you know. The power went out, the internet shut down, the guests were confused, Dad was furious. And then Ryan saw your name on a quarterly report and nearly dropped his glass. I smiled faintly. That's poetic, isn't it? She tried to smile too, but it didn't reach her eyes. He respects you, by the way, she added. Said you were calm, professional, and incredibly sharp, and that after seeing how you handled the last staff meeting, he realized you're not someone people should underestimate. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After another moment, she leaned in, her tone more vulnerable now. I guess I've always thought of you as the background sister, the one who didn't want the spotlight. I didn't think that maybe you were just never offered it. That landed somewhere deeper than she probably intended. I didn't want the spotlight, I said, but I wanted to matter. She nodded, and this time she didn't argue. That, in itself, was new. We parted with a hug. Not tight, not lingering, but not fake either. On the drive home, I thought about how strange it is when the truth finally surfaces, not because you force it out, but because the people who once dismissed it stumble into it themselves. I hadn't said a word to Ryan. I didn't introduce myself with a title or an ego. He had simply arrived at work and discovered who I was, and in doing so, discovered something about the people he thought he knew. I wasn't the story they told about me. I wasn't the footnote to Samantha's fairy tale. I was someone who had quietly built a life, a business, a purpose, and they were just now seeing it because someone from outside finally did. Later that week, Ryan walked into my office with a quarterly finance report. His steps were steady, but there was a flicker of nervousness behind his professional tone. Ms. Warren, he said, offering the folder. I raised an eyebrow. Elena is fine, I replied, taking the papers. He hesitated. I didn't realize, until the meeting with Samantha's family, I had no idea. I figured, I said. Don't worry. I keep family and work separate. He nodded, then added softly, I'm sorry about what happened. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, Everyone's responsible for how they choose to see people. You don't owe me anything. And with that, the conversation was over. But something had shifted, not just in my relationship with Samantha or with Ryan, something deeper. For the first time, the truth wasn't something I had to shout. It had revealed itself, and for once I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. What happens next? That, dear listener, is where things get even more revealing. Because the moment your truth steps into the room uninvited, people start scrambling to rewrite the roles they assign to you. And the family who once pushed you out may suddenly find themselves knocking, asking you to come back, not with love, but with needs. But that's a story for another night. And trust me, you'll want to hear it. The morning of my mother's birthday arrived with the kind of haunting quiet that only comes when you know something is unraveling. The coastal fog rolled in early over Santa Barbara, casting a gray veil over everything outside my apartment window. The sun hadn't fully broken through yet, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to check emails or scan my calendar. I had no plans, no expectations, just a warm cup of peppermint tea cradled in my hands, and the unsettling clarity of knowing I wasn't going to be part of the celebration. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. I didn't have to look to know who it was. I let the screen light up and fade back to black. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time I glanced. Mom. The message was short. Sweetheart, I think the power's out. Can you check for us? It's an important day. I didn't reply. Another message followed. Internet's down too. Guests are coming. Your dad says it might be a provider issue. Can you fix it? I put my tea down, closed my eyes, and leaned back in my chair. The calm that washed over me wasn't indifference. It was the kind of peace you feel when you stop pretending you haven't been hurt, when you stop rushing to fix things that no one ever fixes for you. The next ping was from Samantha. Elena, seriously, this isn't funny. Mom's freaking out. The Wi-Fi is dead and people are about to arrive. Please do something. I looked at the text like it belonged to someone else. There was no, how are you? No, can we talk? Just a command buried inside panic and entitlement. What none of them knew, of course, was that I had canceled all automatic payments over a week ago, the same night Dad told me not to come. The power, the water, the internet, they were never going to last through the weekend. I had known that. But I wasn't punishing them. I was just finally stepping away from a role I had never agreed to play. I stood up and opened the sliding glass door to my balcony. The sea breeze hit me, cool and steady. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a wind chime clinking faintly against the side of a neighbor's porch. I stared out at the morning haze and thought for just a moment that maybe this was what freedom felt like. Stillness. No need to explain, no urge to defend. Just being. Then, unexpectedly, my phone began ringing again. A video call. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I saw the name, Aunt Teresa, I hesitated. She was the only one in the family who had ever sent a birthday message without expecting one in return, who mailed a Christmas card even if she knew I wouldn't come home. I picked up. The screen lit up with the dim interior of her kitchen. It looked like she was using a flashlight to see. Her face appeared weary and unfiltered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but your mom's panicking. The house is dark, the oven's not working. People are arriving soon. No one knows what to do." I said nothing. She paused, watching me carefully, then added, "They're saying you must be sulking. That you couldn't possibly be doing this on purpose." Another pause. A different voice now, shouting in the background. "She's probably being dramatic again?" My mother's voice echoed faintly. No one would be that heartless. Then a sharper voice, more urgent. "Samantha, check with Liam. See if he knows anything. Someone needs to call the power company. We can't have guests showing up to this mess. And then a face appeared on screen. Liam. Samantha's boyfriend. He was wearing a crisp blue shirt, his hair neatly styled, but his eyes widened the second he saw me. "Elena?" he said almost involuntarily. I tilted my head slightly. "Hi, Liam." The room behind him fell silent. You could hear the hum of dead electronics, the uncomfortable shuffle of feet on tile. Samantha stepped into the frame, mouth open, eyes darting between me and Liam. My mother was holding a tray with an unlit birthday cake, and my father stood stiffly, his jaw locked. Everyone looked confused. Or worse, exposed. Liam turned toward them slowly. "She's my direct superior," he said. "The co-founder of Pacific Genomics, my new boss." You could have heard a pin drop. I didn't need to say anything else. I simply nodded. "Hope the introduction goes well." And I ended the call. Afterward, the silence in my apartment felt different. It didn't echo like loneliness. It settled around me like truth, unapologetic, unavoidable. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just grounding myself again. The world outside was still turning. Emails still needed answers. Meetings still needed agendas. But something in my chest had shifted. For years, I had poured myself into that family, hoping they would see me as more than a financial fix or a shadow to someone else's charm. But now, the truth had done the work I had never dared to do. I hadn't told Liam who I was. I hadn't sent a message or dropped a hint. He found out naturally by living his life, and when he did, he spoke the words no one else had ever said aloud in front of my family, that I was the one in charge, that I had built something real, that I mattered. A few hours later, I received a voicemail from Samantha. "You knew," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "You knew this would happen and you just let it. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's pacing like a maniac. Liam's freaking out. You could have warned us. But no, you had to wait until the party to let it all explode. You're so selfish, Elena." I listened to the entire message and then turned off my phone. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. For once, no one could twist the narrative. The truth had arrived in a 3-second greeting. "Hi, boss." And with it, all the masks slipped. That night, I lit a single candle on my windowsill. Not for Mom, not for her birthday, but for myself. For the woman I had spent years becoming while no one noticed. For the woman who had finally stepped out of the waiting room of her family's approval and found something stronger. Self-recognition. In the knowledge that the next chapter of my story would be written not in the shadows of their expectations, but in the light of my own worth. 3 days passed without a single word from Samantha, my parents, or anyone else who had been present in that dim, chaotic house on the day of my mother's birthday. The silence wasn't surprising. It was predictable. It carried the same energy that filled a room when someone drops a glass and everyone freezes, hoping someone else will clean it up. Except this time, I had no intention of grabbing the broom. It was midweek when my inbox pinged with a name I hadn't expected. Liam. The subject line read, "Apology and respect." I opened the email with a measured breath, unsure what I'd find, but his message was nothing like Samantha's voicemail, which still sat unplayed in my phone like an unopened wound. "Elena," he wrote, "I didn't sleep the night after the party. Not because I was angry or embarrassed, but because I was ashamed. I never asked enough questions, never paid attention to the way your name was dismissed in conversation. I see it now, and I'm sorry for ever being a part of that silence. I admire what you've built and the way you handled everything. Quiet, but powerful. Thank you." I sat there for a long moment before typing my response. "Liam, you don't need to apologize. Everyone is responsible for how they choose to see others. I don't bring personal matters into work, but I hope you understand this. Sometimes, silence is the loudest way we can protect our worth." I clicked send and leaned back in my chair. The weight that had settled into my bones after the birthday call with my father didn't vanish, but it shifted. Something about Liam's clarity, his unsolicited recognition, reminded me that the truth didn't always need to be defended. Sometimes it just needed to be lived out loud and allowed to echo. Later that night, another message arrived. This time from Samantha. You knew all along, didn't you? You let it all happen during the party, right in front of everyone. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Liam's been distant. You could have told me. I didn't respond right away. I closed the message and went to the kitchen to make tea. I watched the water boil, the steam rising like quiet defiance from the pot. When I finally returned to my phone, I typed a few calm lines. You say I was cruel, but I was just at home. I didn't start the video call. I didn't call myself Liam's boss. I didn't do anything. And if one simple truth ruined the entire evening, maybe that evening wasn't built on anything real in the first place. I hit send and left it at that. I wasn't interested in a back and forth. I wasn't trying to twist the knife. I was trying to move forward. But moving forward doesn't always mean running ahead. Sometimes it means standing still, finally refusing to move further down a road that only ever leads to disappointment. 2 days later, my mother messaged. Her tone was cautious, polite, but heavy with implication. I never expected you to choose this way to get back at the family. There it was again, the narrative. I had wronged them, not by yelling, not by cutting ties, but by finally allowing them to face themselves without my cover. I didn't reply. That weekend, I attended a leadership retreat in Big Sur with a few other founders. We shared stories of funding challenges, product launches, personal losses. One woman, in her early 40s, described how her family called her the cold one, simply because she refused to be the default caregiver. Another man admitted he was still sending money to a sibling who hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. I didn't tell my story in full, but I listened. And I realized I wasn't alone. On Monday morning, my phone buzzed again. Liam? This time, the message wasn't just a thank you. Elena, I ended things with Samantha. I can't be in a relationship where people wear masks so often, they forget who they are without them. What happened that day shouldn't have happened in front of everyone, but I'm strangely glad it did. It made everything clear. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumphant. I simply sat with it. Because here's the truth. When someone sees your worth without you having to explain it, something fundamental shifts. Not in how you see them, but in how you begin to finally see yourself. I replied simply, I hope you find peace in that clarity, Liam. Everyone has to decide who they're willing to become uncomfortable for and who they're not. I didn't expect to hear from Samantha again so soon, but that same afternoon she messaged again. You're his boss. You have influence. If you say something, maybe he'll reconsider. Please. I read the text 3 times, not because it shocked me, but because it confirmed everything I'd been working so hard not to believe. Even now, she wasn't reaching out because she cared about me. She was reaching out because something she wanted was slipping away, and I might be the only one who could catch it. I stood by the window of my office and stared out at the street below. I remembered countless moments when I'd wished she would ask me how I was doing, when I failed my first pitch deck and spent the night crying over instant noodles, when I flew home after months away and no one asked how my company was progressing, when I called home to say I got a speaking gig at a global health summit and Dad said, "That's nice. Samantha's new apartment has a pool." Now she needed something, and she came to me, not to make peace, but to make a request. I typed back. Liam didn't leave because of anything I said. He left because of who you are, and for the first time, he saw it. She didn't respond. An hour passed, then 2, then another message. You're right, but I don't want to lose him. I'll change. Just this once, please help me fix it. I closed the conversation without answering. Because here's the thing about change. It's not something you beg for in a moment of crisis. It's something you commit to in silence when no one is watching. That evening, I left the office late. The city lights of Santa Barbara twinkled against the surf like scattered stars. The breeze was cool, but for the first time in months, it didn't sting. I walked slowly through the parking lot, keys in hand, heart strangely calm. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't raged. I had simply lived. And in doing so, I had let the truth do the speaking. Not one of them could rewrite what Liam saw with his own eyes. Not one of them could put the genie back in the bottle. And I, finally, didn't feel like I needed to help them try. Because when you stop defending your right to be respected, you stop begging for it, and you start expecting it. The story wasn't over yet, but something essential had shifted, and what came next wouldn't be about confrontation. It would be about consequences. Not revenge, but reality. And that perhaps was the quietest power of all. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't ordered food, and I hadn't told anyone to stop by. In fact, I'd carefully built my weekend around solitude, 2 days without obligation, a cup of herbal tea, and a half-read novel on my coffee table. I wasn't in the mood for interruptions. Still, something pulled me to the peephole. And there they were, my parents. My mother stood at the gate with a small canvas bag clutched tightly in both hands, her posture slightly bent as if fatigue had wrapped itself around her bones. My father was beside her, arms crossed, mouth drawn tight, his stance as rigid as ever. It had been weeks since I'd heard his voice, not since he told me not to call him my father if I insisted on coming home. I didn't move for a long time. My breath sat shallow in my chest. Eventually I opened the door, but I said nothing. No welcome, no warmth. "Hi, honey," my mother began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we come in and talk for a bit?" I stepped aside. They entered quietly, as if unsure of their right to be there. There were no hugs, no pleasantries. The room filled with a thick silence, the kind that makes you painfully aware of every sound, the squeak of the chair leg, the soft clink of water glasses being set down. We sat across from each other, the table between us like a line drawn in sand. My apartment felt smaller with them inside, like it was trying to recoil, to push them out. My mother glanced around, noting how neat everything was. There was no sign of them here, no family photos, no childhood mementos. It must have been obvious. My father cleared his throat first. "About your mom's birthday," he said, pausing. "I said some things I shouldn't have." I didn't respond. I wanted to know what they had come for, not just why they had come. He continued, slower this time. "Maybe we've been a little hard on you." The understatement almost made me laugh, but I kept my expression still. Sensing the conversation faltering, my mother reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She placed it on the table like it was a peace offering. "We've thought about this carefully," she said. "You're stable now. Your work is going well. We were hoping you could help us with some of the monthly costs." I picked up the paper. It was a printed spreadsheet, budget lines highlighted. Total at the bottom, $2,000 per month. "We're not asking for much," my dad added. "Just enough to cover basics, living expenses, insurance, some savings for retirement." I looked up slowly. My voice was calm. "And what about Samantha?" They exchanged a glance. My mother spoke first. "She's been having a hard time since the breakup. Work isn't going great, and emotionally, she's fragile." I felt the breath catch in my throat, not from surprise, but from recognition. It was the same old pattern. Samantha was always fragile, and I was always fine. She got time to heal. I got responsibilities. I leaned forward, folded the paper, and placed it back on the table. "I'll consider it," I said, "on 2 conditions. First, Samantha contributes her share, $1,000 a month. Second, we draft a contract, one that clearly states that when you both pass, the house and all other assets go to me." My mother stiffened. My father's face darkened. "A contract?" he barked. "Are you seriously giving your own parents conditions?" My voice didn't waver. "Yes. Not conditions. Boundaries. I've given almost $16,000 to this family in the last 2 years. Quietly. without ever being asked if I could afford it. And not once did anyone say thank you. So if I'm going to continue supporting you, I need transparency, clarity, a structure. My mother looked shaken. My father stood up, hands slamming the table with a dull thud. The glasses rattled. "We raised you for over 20 years," he shouted. "We gave you everything." I looked at him calmly. "Number, you did what parents are supposed to do. That's not a debt I owe you for the rest of my life. But let's say you want to see it that way. Fine. Let's calculate it. Line by line, add up the diapers, the meals, the school fees, and then subtract every bill I've paid since I turned 25. We'll call it even." He looked like he wanted to scream, but instead he froze. His jaw clenched, his eyes unblinking. My mother gently touched his arm. "Let's go," she said quietly. They stood. I walked them to the door. No hugs, no promises, just a polite exit. As the door shut behind them, the stillness returned. Only this time it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. A page turned, a line drawn. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the soft hum of the city outside. I replayed every sentence in my head, not out of regret, but out of disbelief that it had taken me this long to say them. For years, I had been the safety net, the background solution, the one who paid, who showed up, who never made demands. And now that I had asked for something in return, not love, not affection, but fairness, they had recoiled as if I'd broken some sacred rule. But maybe I had. Maybe the rule was, the one who holds the weight doesn't get to set it down, and I had dared to put mine down. The days that followed were silent. Not a single call, not a message, not even an apology. Just the absence of noise that so often follows when people lose the leverage they use to mistake for love. I went back to work, led meetings, approved projects, walked to my office in the morning sun, and left under the evening stars. But something in me had changed. I was no longer trying to be the dependable daughter they had always needed, but never valued. I had become something else entirely, someone who finally chose herself, and that choice was no longer up for negotiation. The days after my parents' visit passed quietly, as if the universe itself had turned the volume down on my life. There were no follow-up calls, no apologies, no counteroffers about the conditions I had set. It was as if they had made their final attempt to reclaim the version of me they were comfortable with, the obedient daughter who gave freely and questioned nothing. And when they couldn't find her anymore, they simply chose silence. But this silence didn't pierce me the way it used to. It didn't carry the same weight of rejection or loss. This time, it felt clean, necessary, and even liberating. In that newfound stillness, I began to notice other things that had quietly shifted within me. I no longer hovered over their birthdays on the calendar, no longer paused when I passed by the greeting card aisle in the grocery store. I took down the last photo of my family that had hung in a slim frame near my bookshelf. I didn't replace it. Not out of spite, but because it no longer felt like it belonged. I was shedding, piece by piece, the remnants of a version of myself that had once begged to be seen. I was beginning to inhabit a self that no longer asked for permission to exist. At work, the rhythms of leadership grounded me. Liam continued in his role as head of finance, professional and efficient, maintaining a respectful distance that I silently appreciated. We never spoke of Samantha. We never needed to. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was acknowledgement. Some truths, once fully seen, don't need to be spoken again. They just live between two people like a shared understanding, quiet but firm. One particularly brisk afternoon, as I was leaving the office after reviewing our quarterly projections, I found myself stopping at a cafe I hadn't visited in years. It was tucked between two artisan boutiques along a quiet street, with tall windows and a wooden sign above the door that read, "Home is not always a place. Sometimes it's a decision." I stood there for a moment, taking in those words as if they had been waiting for me. Inside, I ordered a hot latte and chose a window seat. I watched the world move on outside, families walking together, students laughing, couples holding hands, And I realized I wasn't bitter that I had missed out on some idealized version of family. I was just grateful that I had stopped chasing it. I had stopped trying to make people love me in the way I needed, and started learning to love myself in the way I always deserved. That night, I found an old playlist I had created during the early years of my startup. The songs I had listened to during midnight coding sessions, investor pitch rejections, and long solo flights to conferences where I felt like an outsider in every room. As the music played, I didn't feel the loneliness I once had. The melodies felt like echoes of the version of me that had built something from nothing, the version who had cried quietly in hotel rooms and still shown up to meetings the next morning without a trace of the storm inside her. I realized I had always been strong, not despite being unappreciated, but because I had learned how to keep moving forward even without applause. About a week later, my doorbell rang again. I hesitated, but when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't my parents. It was Samantha. She looked nothing like the polished sister I had grown up with. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes puffy, her shoulders slumped beneath a rain-dampened coat. I opened the door and stood there without speaking. She looked at me for a moment before finally saying, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. She sat on the same couch where I had once listened to her voicemails in disbelief. Now she sat in person, holding herself like someone who had run out of things to pretend. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she began. "And I'm not here to make excuses. I didn't know how much I'd hurt you. I didn't know what it meant to be you." I stayed quiet, let her speak. "When Liam left, I was furious," she continued. "I blamed you. I thought you ruined everything. But then I realized he didn't leave because of what you did. He left because he saw the gap between who I pretended to be and who I actually was. And I hated that." She paused, tears welling. "I've always had the spotlight, but I never stopped to wonder what it cost you. You were the one holding everything together, and I never saw it. I was so caught up in being adored that I didn't realize I was losing the only person who had ever stood by me even when no one else did." I looked at her and saw not the sister I had grown up resenting, but a woman finally unraveling the lies she had told herself for years. "Why now?" I asked softly. "Because I don't want to lose you too," she said. "I don't want to keep pretending that we're okay when we're not. And if you never speak to me again, I'll understand." But I had to try. There was a long silence. Then I said, "It's not about never speaking again. It's about starting with honesty. No more pretending. No more asking for help only when it benefits you." She nodded quickly, tears spilling now. "I understand." I didn't hug her, not yet. But I walked her to the door. And just before she stepped out into the rain, she turned and whispered, "You've always been the strong one. I was just too proud to admit it." When the door closed behind her, I sat down and breathed. Deeply. Slowly. It wasn't reconciliation, not fully, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to that cafe again and again. I journaled. I walked by the shore. I read books that had nothing to do with business or productivity. I began to feel like I wasn't just surviving. I was expanding. My life was no longer a quiet plea for recognition. It was becoming a full expression of everything I had built, everything I had endured, and everything I was still becoming. One evening, while reviewing investment reports, Liam knocked lightly on my office door. "I'm heading out," he said. "Just wanted to thank you again for how you've handled everything. I've learned more from watching you than from any leadership seminar I've ever attended." I smiled. "Thank you, Liam. That means a lot." He lingered at the door. "And if Samantha ever asks you for another chance, I hope you'll do what's best for you, not for her." I nodded. "I already am." When he left, I turned back to my screen and closed the report. I didn't need to see the numbers to know I was finally in the black, not just financially, but emotionally. I had invested in everyone else for years, time, energy, money, patience. And now, for the first time, I was investing in myself. That's the thing about family. People tell you it's unconditional, but sometimes it comes with the sharpest conditions of all. Be quiet, be useful, don't shine too bright. And when you break those rules, they say you've changed. But maybe change is the most honest thing you can do. If you've ever been the one holding the weight while others danced in the light, if you've ever been called selfish for finally saying no, if you've ever realized too late that being dependable doesn't mean being loved, then let me tell you something. You're not cold. You're becoming clear. And that is the most powerful kind of warmth there is. Looking back on Elena's story from beginning to end, it's impossible not to feel the deep current of quiet power that ran beneath every chapter of her life. From the moment her father told her not to come home for her mother's birthday, to avoid making things awkward in front of Samantha's boyfriend, Elena was thrust into a choice no child ever imagines facing: to continue showing up for a family that refuses to see her, or to step back and reclaim the dignity she had spent her entire life surrendering, little by little, in the hope of being accepted. Elena was not a character born out of rage. Her strength didn't come from confrontation but from stillness, from the long nights building her startup, from quietly paying the bills no one asked if she could afford, from being the silent thread holding her family's comfort together. But when that thread was cut, not by her, but by her father's words, something within her snapped back into place. Not out of rebellion, but out of clarity. Her decision to cancel the automatic payments to her parents wasn't petty. It was deliberate. It was the first time she had chosen to stop being useful in exchange for being tolerated. And when the silence from her family turned into panic on the day of the birthday, no power, no internet, no plan, Elena didn't need to say a single word. Because for once, the absence of her presence spoke louder than any apology she'd ever whispered in her own mind for being too much or too difficult to explain. And then fate stepped in with the kind of irony that can only be described as cinematic. Samantha's boyfriend, Liam, turned out to be Elena's employee, reporting directly to the woman his girlfriend's family had dismissed as awkward and unimpressive. When Liam looked at Elena across a video call and said, "Hi, boss," he didn't just expose a hidden professional identity. He exposed the truth that the daughter who had been overlooked, silenced, and used had quietly built something powerful. And now, the entire family was watching the reflection of their own disregard through the eyes of someone who finally saw Elena for who she was. But perhaps the most profound part of Elena's journey wasn't in the revelation. It was in what she did after. She didn't gloat. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't even correct the stories people had told about her for years. Instead, she let the truth speak for itself. She stood firm in her boundaries, refused to fund dysfunction without fairness, and offered conditions rooted in principle, not pride. And when her parents balked, accusing her of cruelty for finally asking for clarity, Elena didn't fall back into guilt. She held the line. Her exchange with Samantha, too, was not a war. It was a mirror. Samantha, for the first time, was forced to look at herself outside the safety of comparison. Her words, "I didn't realize what it meant to be you," were not a fix, but they were a beginning. And Elena, though cautious, allowed space for something real, not forgiveness on demand, but a slow, measured re-entry into honesty. The story of Elena is the story of many who have felt unseen within their own families. The ones who were quiet, reliable, overachieving, and under-recognized. The ones who became financial safety nets instead of emotional priorities. The ones who were only praised when they made life easier for others and shamed the moment they asked for reciprocity. Elena didn't burn bridges. She simply stopped building them alone. So what can we take away from her journey? The lesson is simple but not easy. Love without boundaries becomes servitude, and silence, if stretched too long, becomes complicity. We owe it to ourselves to ask this difficult question: am I giving from love or am I giving from fear? Fear of being excluded, fear of being called selfish, fear of not being the good one anymore. Elena teaches us that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning others. It's deciding that your well-being, your worth, and your identity are not negotiable. That showing up for family should never require erasing who you are, and that when the truth finally finds its way to the surface, it will always shine brighter than any narrative built on convenience. If you've ever felt like Elena, taken for granted, dismissed, or used for what you could provide instead of who you are, then maybe it's time to ask yourself the same question she finally answered. What would it look like if I stopped proving and simply started being? Here's a small reflection for you to consider. If you were in Elena's position and your family suddenly asked you to resume support after years of emotional neglect, what would you do? Would you A, say yes, but set strong boundaries and terms before offering help again? Or B, say no entirely and walk away to protect your peace? Drop your answer in the comments, A or B, and let us know why. Your thoughts might resonate with someone else going through the same quiet battles. And now, as we wrap up Elena's powerful story, we want to hear from you. What part of her journey hit you the hardest? Do you think she was too firm or finally fair? Share your perspective in the comments so others can reflect with you. Sometimes just one story shared can help another person take the first step toward healing. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, or gave you the courage to look at your own relationships a little differently, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like Elena's to life, stories that remind us we're not alone and that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Stay tuned, because the next story might be yours.